You'll see a new face. So Judy Sheriff is stepping in for Megan Bowen, who had a last-minute scheduling conflict. Judy's a rock star. She works closely with Ciara, Scott, and myself on the client side, and it's been here many years. So excited to get her perspective in this conversation as well. But that is not Megan.
Thank you, Evan. Sorry, everybody, you have to deal with me today, not Megan. I'll try to fill her shoes.
Cool. So today we're going to dive into all things ABM specific. One thing that we talk a lot about internally is just how subjective the acronym really is and how everybody comes up with a new definition. We have conversations with clients who kind of define it one way. We have other clients who just think it's paid media only. And I think it's good to have this conversation and dialogue to recognize that there's no clear one definition or one way to define ABM. It's like how your organization can utilize it and what tools and tactics it needs in order to scale. And I think that that's the biggest blocker for us is like when we have conversations with clients and prospective prospects, it's like, we need to run ABM. And we dig a little bit deeper and it's like, what does that mean to you? And they just want to run like a targeted account list or they want ads in front of a certain prospect, but there's no really thought beyond that. I think like the goal of this conversation really is to kind of frame it up around four key pillars is understanding across our group of people. And just I would love to, anybody listening, if your perspective too, but what does ABM mean to us? How would you get started? So some of the tips and tricks that we utilize, what makes it hard? Like what are some of the blockers and the bullshit that just it's frustrating to deal with? And then measurement. That's a key component for a lot of this. So it's kind of the path that we're going to take on. But yeah, I think we can just probably jump into it. We'll probably wrap up the last 15 minutes or so with any questions that you might have. But throughout this, we want to keep it super conversational. So bring those live, come on to chat, turn off your camera, whatever you want to do, and let's get started. So cool. Judy, I might kick it off with you since you are the Megan replacement in the moment, but
I forgot to mute, Scott. I put myself here as a sitting duck.
Yeah. No, but I would love to just kind of, across the group, like, what's your perspective on like what ABM means to you? How do you define it or how you define it over your career?
Yeah, I was actually just talking with one of our directors here about this week around the fact that I feel like out of any acronym in marketing, ABM has really been pervasive for like a decade, and we're still talking to companies where it's like we want to do this for the first time or it's a new initiative for us. It's our big focus for 2025. And I feel like in 2015, I was sitting on demand-based demos talking about personalizing our website. So kudos to whoever has driven this ABM acronym because I think it's had such longevity. But even before it became a thing with marketing, it's not like a revolutionary concept, really. I think before we had the tech, sales was still going after target account lists and, having a coordinated effort on the sales front. We had technology that allows us to get really specific with who we're marketing to. But I think in my mind, when I see true successful ABM, like across our client base, it's the coordinated effort between marketing and sales to really surround their ideal ICP potential customers with the marketing messages to, put the company top of mind, and then a coordinated sales follow-up to those same accounts. Um, I think it's also beyond just like the digital touch point of marketing and thinking about how your ideal target account list is flowing into your event strategy, direct mail, any marketing touch point where you can go after a specific audience. How is your target account list audience fitting into that?
Yeah. I think that technology plays such a big part in that. Ciara, I'd be curious too. I know you've worked closely with a lot of clients, like what your perspective is on how you think about ABM.
Yeah, I mean, I think Judy, like you're totally right. Like I remember before I was at Refine Labs, I was at another company, and before that I was at another company, and at both of those companies before Refine, we were talking about account-based marketing. And really what the conversation was who are we targeting? It's a targeting strategy at the highest level. And so I think with any targeting strategy, you're going to need alignment with your sales team because they are ultimately the folks that are going to be driving people through your sales funnel and the buying funnel and hoping that they purchase whatever you're selling. And so with account-based marketing, it's really this notion of being a little bit more strategic into not just the people that you want to target, but the accounts that you want to target. And with some of our technology evolution over the last decade, we've seen a lot more information around accounts, and it gives us a little bit more of a strategy around who we should be targeting and what's right for our business. And so I think that it makes perfect sense to me that this is a continual conversation, just as targeting in general from a marketing perspective is a continual conversation. And so I think with account-based marketing, it's really more about trying to figure out who your list is first and foremost, and what tools you need to implement to gain that list, or get a sense of what that list is. And then of course, like I agree with what Judy said, is having this alignment between your team and then of course your sales team, and maybe even your operations team, and maybe even some other teams like your partner team, around who this target audience is. It's an ICP exercise more so than it is a let's figure out which specific accounts we need. The first step is really understanding your ICP, and that's alignment across most of the business units in your organization.
Yeah, I'll kind of continue on that, Brad, because I think my biggest issue with ABM, or at least the current state of, is actually just literally the M in the acronym, right? Is like marketing, and it kind of puts the onus on marketing to figure this out. But I think when ABM works, and in my experience, the only way to make it work is when it is at minimum a joint effort between marketing and sales. And so I sometimes like to think of it as account-based messaging or account-based motion, right? It doesn't matter like if it's a sales motion or a marketing motion, or sorry, I should say who's doing it. Like it needs to be both. It needs to be a combination of like one-on-one personalized outreach. And then, we do have new tools that we can use on the marketing front, right, to improve targeting. But if we're not changing the message and we're not tailoring that to this audience or this ICP, then I don't know, is it really ABM, or is it just an account-based ad strategy, which is not new at all? So I think really dialing in the message, who we want to go after, the audience, and then I think measurement is also kind of a big element of ABM that I think is different than some of the other always on or evergreen campaigns that we might run.
Yeah, and I feel like we generally complicate what ABM is. And I think it's kind of, in theory, because it's absorbed so many different definitions over the course of the years and the different tools. And there's a lot of clients where I personally don't think they're necessarily set up for ABM or need an ABM motion too, right? I think sales cycle, ACV play a big factor in that. When you think of large scale tier one accounts have a large buying committee, you need those multiple touch points and those different ways to engage with that audience. And sometimes, like if you are just running more of an executed targeted account list on the paid media front, that is a sound strategy. Just recognize that, like, as we think of the definition of ABM, that's cross-functional organizational alignment and influence on a targeted account list. So definitely agree with you there that marketing owning it through and through becomes, like, I think a bit of a cop out for organizations, like marketing failed versus no, we failed to come together and like actually understand what it is. And there's so many different, I guess, parts to it too, right? One-to-one, how depending on how you tier. And I think, like, let's get into a little bit of, from your guys' perspective, like how do you even get started? So let's say you do have the right tools, and maybe not even the tools, but the mindset, the alignment there. What would you recommend, or what are some areas that you're like, this is typically the best case forward?
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done before you actually invest in the tech component of ABM. I see a lot of companies that we work with that are paying for 6sense or paying for Demandbase, or a specific tool that's barely being used, or maybe it's just generating a couple of audiences and it's the full functionality is untapped. I think you can get a lot of the foundations in terms of alignment with sales, like who is that list? Ciara mentioned it's an ICP exercise, so I think there's sort of just like the foundation of your business that needs to be in place. You have to really understand who your customer is and have the product market fit to make it be successful. I think things like aligning on your list, your target companies, figuring out what components you want to bring into ABM. Is it going to be digital events, SDR outbound? Is it those things lining up before you spend money on an external tool will make that tool more valuable.
Let's get into a little bit like tactically, like you're saying, you create your ICP list, or you don't have to have a bunch of tech to like create that. What are different ways you think about, or like what the tools you might have in an organization to use to get started? Anybody?
I mean, Scott, I know you came off mute too, so feel free to
Oh, go
piggyback.
ahead.
Yeah, I mean, this is also like a really good question, Evan, because we always talk about these like ABM software and they're like really expensive, like to get Demandbase and like, but this is how you get your lists and it's beautiful and has intent signals. You definitely don't need that type of tool to implement an ABM strategy within your organization. I think it's a really good place to start with just what you have in your CRM or your customer database. So if you want to go and look at the folks that are essentially close, like they are your customers, and coming up with an ICP list based off of your customer attributes. And then that is something that you can kind of compare with the other accounts that are in your CRM. So you might not have a lot available there, but it's at least something to start. And then you can use a tool like LinkedIn to import a list and then potentially have a lookalike, option with LinkedIn to get more accounts. So there are ways that you can do it that you don't have to pay someone to get you a list. But there also, if you do have budget for this, there also are options to not have to sign on with a Demandbase or, a 6sense to get all of the extra bells and whistles that the software will give you. You can, buy a list from someone using ZoomInfo or something like that you can be pretty prescriptive of what your demographics are, of course, like ICP fit and things like that you can use into your CRM, and then of course any of your paid platforms that you want to target. But I think that the main point here is that you really don't have to pay a bunch of money to start with ABM, and it's really about trying to understand at least the accounts that you currently have in your CRM and which of those will fit your ICP, which of those are customers, which of course you don't want to target those for new business, but those are a good boilerplate to understand your ICP, and then which are not customers but fit your ICP, and that's who you want to go after initially in your targeting strategy.
Yeah, I'll add to that too on the building out your list piece. I think, and everybody's mentioned, you don't need tools. I would say it's actually detrimental to get the tools first. Because if you don't have a plan, you don't have a strategy, and we don't know who we're talking to or like what types of messages do we want to share with them or how, then the tool drives a strategy for you rather than you get to go and shop for a tool that actually supports the strategy that you've come up with. And then list-wise, it is a really good opportunity, or audience-wise, to figure out like who is our core ICP and like what segment of that can we afford to go after for ABM. So it might not be your whole ICP. It might just be like tier 1 accounts. And a good exercise that I've seen in the past at some clients and also some companies that I've worked for directly is instead of just pulling that list of top customers and like reverse engineering it and figuring out, okay, what's similar across them, they actually build out what do we think is like the firmographics or the demographics of our top tier customers. And so you build out like a grading system beforehand and then run that against your top tier customers and see like where we rank. Do we have the proper understanding of like what the makeup of our top customers is? And then you kind of keep refining that until what you think actually matches the reality of like who your customers are. So ultimately you end up, I think, in the same place as if you would just sort of reverse engineer based off top customers, but it's a really good thought exercise to get the company aligned on like what do we think matters in our top accounts. But yeah, I think starting with the audience, in my experience, always has to be the first place, right? Because then your next exercises are going to be, okay, where are they? What channels are they on? Because it may not be the same across your whole ICP. You may find we make the most money in accounts in this vertical or of this size, and really figuring out like, okay, what segment of our ICP can we afford to run ABM? Because going back to Evan's comment on ACV, if they're not big enough deals, then ABM's maybe not the right strategy, just depending on, again, your sales cycles and how you build out that marketing plan and the cost structure.
Yeah, and I feel like I love that like forcing function of a thought exercise, right? And just kind of understanding who our buying committee is. I think some of the easiest unlocks to get started is typically people are running an ABM strategy that we've signed on, but it's just a large account list that they're pushing ads to, right? Let's just say thousands of accounts and they're just those fit their ICP. But I think what you really need to understand is like how to segment and take that a step further. So I always think of it in like, how do I segment that by tier one, two, three, and potentially four? It's like, look at that LTV and that or that revenue band of your top customers. Like what is their niche industry or fit that have been there? Like, and then what are those accounts that encompass that? Perhaps it's only 20. That's like your tier one where you can have really targeted one-to-one plays. You can think about events. And then like what's tier two? Can you verticalize this, right? Is there sub industries within this larger bucket of accounts, potentially 30 to 50 accounts that it's like we see a lot of fintech or a lot of healthcare, and then we can create more targeted components there. Then I think this is where like a tier three in my mind, and everybody defines it differently, but it's like this demand gen at scale, right? So it's just really targeted ads across this account list. And I think if you have intentions behind like how to tier or segment your audience, that's like the first step, because a lot of times you'll be overwhelmed with like, okay, all these accounts are so different. How do I even engage with them? But like to your point, Scott, like tiering is the right exercise. Using your CRM though, and the data within there can tell you a ton. If you aren't able to identify some of the simple data, I think that's a different discussion, right? Like you should be able to get some general guidance on like industry, employee size, revenue bands. I think that would be like a foundational component, but that's like the getting started point. And then what the hell do they want, right? Those accounts.
I was just going to add that I would argue if you can't track the basic data, you shouldn't be doing ABM yet.
Yeah.
You should
Great.
be able to do a win-loss analysis on your closed won deals and understand those facts before you even approach ABM.
So true. So you assume the list is built, or you're kind of finding the tools. Okay, I go in there, segment. I'm starting to create various plays based off of that, or strategies based off of that. Like, how am I going to engage? Is it going to be one-to-one personalized events? Is it going to be like industry specific webinars? I think that where I always get stuck, and still to this day, is like measurement on the ABM front. And I think we can probably spend a little bit of time here, like the different tools, and only kind of get a little bit more tactical, like with what you have, assuming it's a bit of a limited tech stack, what resources would you use, or do you look at with some of the clients that you work with, like on how to measure the success of ABM?
Scott and Ciara and I all have marketing ops backgrounds. So this is probably our favorite part of ABM, is just figuring out like, is it working or not? My answer will be sort of tech agnostic right now, and just like at the most sort of tactical basic level, it's important within your CRM to create a field that's going to flag or indicate when an account is a target account. It says maybe it's a Boolean checkbox. Maybe you have a drop-down list that's tier one, tier two, tier three, if you're going to be reporting kind of on your tiers separately. But like, having a specific location on that object in Salesforce or HubSpot, whatever CRM you're using, so that at the very preliminary level, you can build a report that says, is there any pipeline or opportunities being created from this set of accounts? Is that increasing as we put more effort into outreaching these accounts or marketing to these accounts, or are we not seeing any movement? And like this could be done without any other external tech. There are obviously integrations that provide a lot more visibility into what type of engagement the accounts are having with your marketing efforts. And I think that's like the phase two. But phase one is just be able to notice which accounts are target accounts, and are you seeing any traction with those accounts because of your efforts. I think there's a lot to say on this, so I'm going to let Ciara and Scott add in more context.
Yeah, I'll start with like the business metrics and like setting yourselves up for success there. I think that part gets skipped a lot. So I would say like the beauty of creating a really narrow ICP for ABM, right? Is you can look at the makeup of those customers that you have that fall into that top tier customers. Going off of what Judy and Ciara were saying, maybe you don't run to, everybody, right? Maybe you have a set of customers that are good customers, but also like move through your sales cycle really quickly. You might have some huge customers, but maybe when you do win-loss analysis, you go, oh, that type of customer we actually don't win very often. So, right, you're really focusing down on this list. And then you can look at, okay, how much money do we make off those accounts over what period of time? So you can start to then, I keep saying reverse engineer, I'll come up with a better term later, but reverse engineer, like, okay, how much can we afford to spend on trying to get more accounts like this? So like, what is our target customer acquisition cost? And then obviously the biggest variable in that is going to be when do we need to make the money back? And I think that is a business decision and one that will bring like more departments into this conversation. You know, if you're willing to wait 5, 10 years to get the money back, like, you know, your target CAC could be very, very high. That's probably not the scenario for most companies. It might be we need it back in a month, 6 months, a year, right? But then you're also having that conversation around for these types of accounts and how long they stick with you and churn rate, all those things may factor into like what we're willing to spend to get those accounts. And so I think that's the core business metric. And then, you know, you have obviously all of the engagement metrics and account penetration metrics and things like that on top of that, where you're really, I think, just trying to report on, are we hitting the audience we want? Are they engaging? Like, do they care about what we have to say and how much? And like who in that account is engaging, right? So are we getting people in different roles across the organization and not just trying to go super pinpoint to, you know, one specific role that's usually the person who requests a demo, right? We want to hit the people around them. So your metrics have to change to account for that because not everybody you're going after in these accounts do you expect to come and convert on the website. And there's a good chance that your funnel metrics right now are built on that behavior. So I think it's different for ABM.
Yeah, I would definitely echo both of those. And I think something we've danced around a little bit in this conversation so far is this notion of intent signals. And then, you know, I know we've talked about like moving folks through the funnel, like accounts through the funnel, but we really haven't, you know, outlined, okay, this is what your top of funnel buying stage should look like, middle of funnel buying stage should look like, you know, and then kind of right before they get into your funnel, like the decision phase, what that should look like, or bottom of the funnel. And I think this is very different for each business, which is why I stay away from giving you a prescriptive, here's what you should do in terms of your funnel. But I think having an idea, kind of like what Scott and Judy have said around who are the accounts that you want to target. That's obviously step one, which we've talked about. And then who's engaging is really important. And so you can understand engagement in a various different ways. You can, of course, use an ABM software. You can use LinkedIn's great for comparing accounts with who's engaging. If you reach out to your LinkedIn reps, they will tell you, give you a list of who is engaging and who you've also served impressions to on your accounts. And then, of course, like are people, you know, if you, I dare say scoring model, but if you are using a scoring model, you can, you know, Evan's like, I hate scoring. If you are using a scoring model, you can kind of engineer it to really serve your ABM reporting well, in the sense that if folks are opening an email, that's, you know, that's part of the score. That's an engagement metric. If folks are viewing an ad on LinkedIn, which is, you're not going to get much in terms of Meta or, you know, X or Reddit, but LinkedIn's really great for understanding, you know, who exactly is seeing your ads. And so kind of evaluating those different engagement metrics, and then you can really like provide a score for these accounts or people in your CRM. And then based off of that, you can understand which of the accounts know about your brand the most, and then which of the accounts don't know about your brand the most. And so then from there, if you see that, you know, that subset of accounts that you're typically winning doesn't know about your brand, and the subset of accounts that doesn't win as much knows about your brand, then we have to switch strategies a little bit. And so I think looking at that in that way is also really helpful. And then I also want to make sure we answer Danny's question. I don't know, this kind of is in line with potentially reporting and measurement, or at least just alignment internally. So Evan, I'm happy to answer, or whatever process you want to implement here.
Yeah, no, let's pull it. Let's jump into it. I think it's all relevant because I think a big part of this whole conversation is like how people define ABM really ties back to like the reporting, the measurement, what success looks like. So I think we talk about this for a good portion.
Yeah, cool. And I think I'll just read Danny's question here. It's about how would you ensure all the team, especially sales team, is recording all the engagement and the tools for ABM approach, and how to avoid double communication from different teams internally to the targeted prospects. So I think I'm glad you brought this up, Danny. It's definitely part of the internal conversation and discussion you need to be having with, your stakeholders. Mostly we talk about sales stakeholders, but if there are other stakeholders in the business, make sure everyone is involved in these types of conversations. Typically, the sales and marketing engagements should be different. So sales is going to be like if they have, their target lists and each sales rep has their list of specific accounts, they're going to use different tactics to go after this target account list than the marketing team is going to use. Marketing team will be more of like, I hate using spray and pray, but it is more of this like we're going after all these accounts in a more widely used fashion, whereas sales is going to go pick and choose which accounts they want to go after. Maybe they do a gift incentive, maybe they use LinkedIn InMail, maybe they use just direct, like more of that direct outbound type of contact. Whereas marketing, it's gonna be a little bit more strategic on we're gonna go after them with ads, or we're gonna invite them to an event, we're gonna ask them to join a webinar, whatever tactics you want to use internally. But it's really important to lay out all of that in a spreadsheet or some sort of document that's like sales, you guys use this, marketing use this, and it's totally fine to double communicate with these accounts as long as it's in a different fashion. So we want to use many different tactics to talk to these accounts, but the tactics will vary per department.
I will add a specific use case at a prior company that I was at. We had a sales outreach tool. We were using Groove, so like an automated email sequencing tool. There was a integration between that tool and Salesforce. It auto logged outreach specifically to the tagged accounts, and we were able to pull sort of task reports in Salesforce that looked at by target account when was their last outreach from sales and when was the date of their most recently engaged marketing campaign, to be able to get sort of a scale perspective on which accounts have been followed up with most recently from sales, which ones need more hands-on attention, and try to determine, total number of outreaches that are happening within an account prior to them joining the list versus us ideally closing them as a closed won customer. So I think sort of depending on your sales ops structure and what tools you have, there's some ways to automate or provide some more visibility into what sales is doing from an outreach perspective as well. There's more questions.
Yeah, no, this one's like I was just reading through this Devin had, and I think it's pretty relevant to an area that ABM I've sometimes I don't know, Devin, if you would want to come on and just ask your question and see we can kind of just talk through it, or I'm happy to read it.
I have some more. It really opens up more questions for me when
Yeah.
I read through this situation. Um, I think, immediately my thought is like, how did you determine which accounts were going to be on this list? And
Mm-hmm. I
I
think that's
guess, like, are they the right fit accounts if they're showing no buying intent down the road, or is there something else from your conversations with sales or your buying process? Is there a product gap? Is there a competitor that is frequently coming into the mix? It's without knowing a little bit more about the business, it's hard to understand where that gap might be, but to have them, be engaged across emails and ads and webinars and then not ever want to buy makes me feel like maybe there's either a miss in the type of company that you're going after, or your solution isn't meeting their needs.
Yeah, the other thing that I would add is like obviously the time frame is going to be specific to your business and also this ICP that you're going after, right? Or that you've modeled after for ABM. So I would say that like in general, you need at least 2 sales cycles to make like much of an impact, right? Like anybody who's buying right now is going to have been heavily influenced before. So you can, get some intent lists or like try to capture them as they're really low in the funnel, but you're swimming upstream a little bit because they probably have a brand preference already. So you might have a chance of getting in there. But really, it's going to take a while to drive like awareness and educate your audience on why you're the better solution. And so that's going to just take a while. The other thing I would say is, and this is why I think lead scoring gets a bad rap, because I also don't like it in the way that's usually used. But engagement does not equal intent. I think that's like a common misconception in our marketing models. Um, and a lot of people may just want to learn from you and you have great content, but they're not in market, or the person that is engaging with you is not the person who can decide to like move into a buying motion. So I think oftentimes we're thinking about like how can we move people into that buying motion, but I think in a business it's got to come from some other problem that they're trying to solve or initiative that they have as an organization, and you can't really make that happen. You can't create the catalyzing event. I think what you can do is you can make people problem aware. So if you have a different take on a category or a problem, you can kind of plant that in their head because maybe they were never considering solutions, right? Like nobody's considering a solution to a problem they don't know that they have. But just because you made them aware that they have this problem or this opportunity that you can solve doesn't mean that the second they understand that, they're going to then go try to buy it. That can take a while. So then, yeah, how do you know, like, I guess when to stop going after them? I think you have to build that into your ABM strategy and like what is the timeline? Maybe you come up with a big list and you split it and you say we're just going to run our ABM motion to half of this list, and then you do that for like, let's say you have a 3-month sales cycle, so you do that for 6 to 9 months, and then you move on to a different list. The same way that sales would handle their prospecting, right? Is they're going to have some way to like segment this larger audience and prioritize it and go after them. So I think you can link up with sales on that too. So you're hitting the same accounts at the same times.
Yeah, and there should be like a nurture fallback, right? So we kind of engage for a period of time. You cohort the set of accounts that you're going after for, let's say, 3 months, and maybe 1 month's like hyper personalized focus, like more of a tier one approach if these are larger enterprise accounts. I think one thing to take into consideration is like, what are your competitors that they potentially are the current solution? What are their contracts typically, that contract length? A lot of times they can engage 3 to 6 months before they're even eligible to start kicking the conversation to move forward. So having that conversation, trying to get the insight of like, typically we sign like a 12-month deal. There's signals that you can kind of look for to see. Sometimes you'll see case studies or things from that company that speaks about like a new customer they just signed, and you kind of do some customer research there. But having a default nurture stream that just kind of keeps like an evergreen pulse on these accounts, whether it's email to that buying committee in the short term, is good. And then if you see new engagement signals, let's say you ran that for 3 months, you kind of pulled back because you didn't see a lot of traction. You see some more signals based on whatever you're tracking, whether that's new contacts coming in, raising their hand. That's where you can like re-engage or have another system that kind of activates them as like a demand gen tactic. So more of an ad awareness play, building that messaging and strategy again. Scott, it looks like Danny has a follow-up there for you.
Oh, sorry. Let me take a look. Okay, I'll read it real quick. One thing we're also struggling with the marketing side is how we can measure marketing success in real time if we are not using engagement. As many businesses have a long sales cycle. How do we tie up the pipeline with marketing activities in real time? That's a good question. I don't know. I don't know that you can in real time. I think that this is where aligning on the metrics as an organization is important, and like what do we think that those metrics mean, right? Before you start. So again, is engagement a sign of intent? I don't think so. Obviously, some engagement is better than no engagement, right? So in some ways there you're reporting on like the effectiveness of your marketing spend. I think when you report on things like accounts reached, engagement, audience penetration, and you're saying we're using our marketing dollars wisely, like we are talking to who we want to talk to and they care about what we have to say. Like I think those are the engagement metrics are the whether or not they care. So I do think those are important. I'll call them metrics. I don't know that leading indicators is necessarily the right terminology, but I do think it's important to report on that. And if the organization is not, I guess, aligned on the fact that those things have value, then like maybe you're not ready to do ABM. Again, I think if the expectation is like we're going to turn on marketing and then everybody who sees it, right, is just going to want to buy all of a sudden and they're going to show up in the pipeline, like nobody buys anything that way, certainly not expensive considered purchases. None of us operate that way. So like why would we expect our customers to operate that way? I don't know if that answers your question. I think I just kind of doubled down on the things you asked, what there were alternatives to, but I really do think those metrics are important to show the organization and get alignment on.
I love it. I mean, we can go into some more.
Eric, right? I think there was a question around who in the org needs to help facilitate better collaboration between marketing and sales when it comes to ABM.
Oh, I missed that.
It got buried in the middle. It's a good question. I mean, I think there's your marketing leaders, your sales leaders, and then I think depending on how your team is structured, marketing ops leaders, sales ops leaders. That's probably to facilitate the collaboration between those teams, but then like one level up, I think you need to have your executives bought into the fact that you're planning to execute an ABM strategy and have that alignment that this is a co-effort from both teams, be driven home at your all hands, be part of your quarterly strategic initiatives, reinforced at a company level that this is something we're all invested in and we're all measuring the joint impact through more revenue coming from these target accounts at the end of the day. I'm sure in larger orgs, there's more sub teams that come into play. If you're running it across marketing, you have your digital leads, but if you're flowing things down to event or field, there's that take on it as well. And so anybody touching ABM needs to have the mindset that it needs to be a two-way comm street with sales, and the follow-up on the other side needs to be cohesive with what we're doing from a marketing front.
Yeah, I agree. And I think what I was seeing work really well with some of our clients is it's like kind of this top-down approach. So the leadership at, the executive level leadership, or high level leadership at your organization, depending on how big your organization is, they need to be bought in from the start, and then they also need to very much like implement their strategy within their teams. And so what I've seen work really well is that the CMO is bought in, the CEO is bought in, and then maybe like the executive level sales leader is bought in, or CRO, whatever, executive C-suite that you have in your company. And then it's a very coordinated effort between kind of the top person, like your CEO or president, and then your leader of marketing, leader of sales. And then they kind of talk about it all the time. And it's like, we're talking about it during reporting meetings, we're talking about it every week. And then your team is focused on account-based marketing. And so we talk about the list, we talk about which of the lists are, becoming hand raisers or MQLs or high intent leads, which of the lists are becoming pipeline. And then you're really focusing a lot of your reporting on it because that's what the executive level cares about. And so that's kind of the coordinated effort and the discussion that needs to be happening pretty much every single day in order for an effective account-based marketing strategy to work for your business. And then something I think too that we haven't really mentioned yet is, to really validate and gut check the I guess the efficacy of your list. So what I've seen work well with companies is, of course, you're going to get inbounds from folks that are not on your list. That's going to happen. And so it's really important to compare the folks that are not on your list with the folks that are on your list and how they're moving down the funnel. And ideally, you want to see massive upticks in conversion rates from the folks that are on your list because they're more an ICP fit for your business and for your product, compared to the people that are not on your list. If you're not seeing that, then there's something wrong with the account-based list that you're going after. So really make sure that is part of your measurement strategy, as also that's what, leadership and stakeholders are going to want to know is this list actually the right list? Or Because if it's not, then you're wasting money getting together this list, you're wasting money on your strategy, and you might as well just use native targeting because that seems to be working better for you in that moment.
One thing that Ciara, you were mentioning was the reporting, and that's like the piece that I think about when I think about who needs to be bought in and who needs to help facilitate. So like as high up in your org as that report goes, they need to be bought in. In some earlier stage companies, startups, et cetera, that is probably includes the board, right? So if the CRO and the CMO agree on, here's our ABM approach and here's what we're going to measure, but then the board says, yeah, but your cost per MQL is going up, then right, that's going to override like what you want to do from an ABM standpoint. Because generally in an ABM strategy, you're going to hit a more personas in the accounts you want to go after, but we know that not all those personas are potential champions. You might also do some like pipeline marketing. So they're already in an op, which is usually when we turn off marketing. So we're not spending dollars to drive behavior that's already happened. But in an ABM motion, you might actually increase your spend or increase the personas you talk to once they're in that opportunity level. So you're creating awareness within an account that you believe you're going to have, start to have conversations with the buying committee, and there's, other people that are involved in that process. So yeah, I would say anybody that's looking at the numbers needs to be bought in on like what those numbers are going to be, what the goals are. And so, yeah, it definitely is, I think, top down in that regard, at least from a buy-in standpoint. The strategy can come bottoms up, but the buy-in and the commitment to doing it has to come from the top.
Yeah, and I think the reporting piece of it is very, I don't want to say subjective, but it depends on like who in the team is reporting out which insight. So if you're direct, like boots on the ground, marketing manager, demand gen manager, you're likely doing more of the account penetration or audience penetration that we're getting there, right? So you're reporting those metrics. But then if you're thinking about like an account list perspective, like understanding what percentage of those accounts have had some sort of marketing engagement interaction, it's all defined by how you define those intent signals or those engagement signals. I think that part is like you don't have a perfect like ABM dashboard. There might be directional ones, but I think it's just what signals you quantify as being successful. So is it time on site? Is it site visits? It's a certain job titles. Like all of that is relevant to build like that ideal space. But what I see typically coming in like leadership conversations, we're able to interact with or have our brand logo in front of this audience or 50 to 60% of this audience for the last 60 days. Like that is success on our part because we know that we're driving that brand awareness or like that more demand gen push for create demand.
Okay. Yeah, totally. I agree with that, Evan. And then just to piggyback on that, it's also, if you look at when folks are becoming like getting into your funnel with like I would say through like a hand raised type of motion, contact sales, demo request, whatever it is on your website. When they enter that funnel and they fill out that form at that moment, can you go and look at the engagement that that account has had? Is it a lot of engagement? Is it not a lot of engagement? Where is that person or I guess account at when they come inbound through a high intent form? And that will also inform your strategy. Typically what we see is like the folks that are more engaged, they at least have a little bit more knowledge about your account. You've been running an ABM, of course, like Scott said, I think 2 sales cycles is good to at least when you start your ABM strategy to when you can actually appropriately start to measure it. But it's really important to understand the engagement when folks are coming in, and then that will kind of guide how you want to market to those folks or not market to those folks, depending on what you see.
Yeah.
We talked a lot about just the engagement piece, and I just want to re-add that you can track this without necessarily having a specific ABM tool. I hacked together this with Marketo and essentially saying if anyone who has an email domain at any of these target accounts that we're at engages with any of these variety of marketing efforts, we had a status field in Salesforce called ABM status that would be not engaged, marketing engaged, sales engaged, to be able to report on that over time. And we automated the sales engaged piece too if they replied back to an email coming through the email sequencing piece. But there's a lot of deep insights you can get from some of the tools around what they specifically did to engage, but just at a high level, you can track percentage of contacts that you have at the account that have engaged with marketing or sales in some capacity and get that as your baseline before you actually invest in tech.
Yeah, it makes me think back to kind of like the lead scoring comments too, where I think there are some good opportunities to like change how you think about account scoring. And I think so often, right, account scoring just becomes the sum of the lead scores from the leads at that account, which is a little lazy, right? Like this is another opportunity, I think, to get aligned as an organization. Like, what do we think are the signals, right, that somebody might be ready to move into, an account, sorry, not just an individual might be ready to move into that buying motion. So, does one person at an account with 10 engagements, is that the same value as one account with 10 people with a single engagement? Like, I don't know. I don't have a strong opinion on that. I think it's unique to your business. But there's probably some, right, weighting, not just on like what they engage with, but how many people over what time period. So you can get kind of a better picture. And again, it's still really just an engagement score, but uh, sometimes that's the best that we have to work with. And then again, you can still show that like we are driving awareness among this account. And that could include all sorts of things. So I think if maybe you have a PLG like freemium model in addition to like an enterprise sales model. Well, how many people from the accounts you're targeting have signed up for the free account, right? Like that would be a huge indicator that they're curious, even though maybe they haven't submitted a requested demo form yet. So I think you just have to think about all of those pieces and how they play together. And again, like what do we think this means based on how people engage, and then kind of weight it accordingly.
Yeah, there's no like perfect playbook. There's guidance from playbooks, like informing ways to think about it tactfully and tactically, excuse me. So got a few more minutes here. I just kind of want to close out with, where do you often see, I just love this because I feel like we get a rapid fire of answers, but typically when do you see like ABM strategies, maybe not fail? I hate that word fail because, right, you're just like learning and iterating, but when do you see them like not successful or the initiatives kind of fall short of what the expectations are? I've heard a few things, right? There's not enough time bound to like actually understand that momentum. So people turn it on for a couple months and they're like, oh, we're not seeing that movement or that signal. Well, if you, depending on that tier, right, you could have a lot longer. So just kind of curious your guys' perspective of where you've seen opportunities for maybe to think of before it happens with other accounts.
Yeah, I really think it's just like, what we've talked about in the beginning is you really need alignment. You really, really need alignment with other stakeholders in the business. You can't just like run ABM in a marketing silo. And I loved what Scott said about the M in ABM is like so misleading. It really should be like an account-based motion, or I can't remember what else you said, Scott, but I loved that kind of reframe. And so that's first and foremost. And then of course, you need to like the list is a really important piece. So if you have alignment and then you get your list and the list is not within your ICP fit, or there's a lot more accounts that maybe should be on that list that aren't, that is something that is not going to set you up for success. And so really ensure alignment, and then really ensure the appropriate list, and that the list is going to take time. That it takes a lot of time to figure out your list. It takes a lot of time to socialize that internally to figure out if that's the right ICP fit for you and if those are your right accounts. And so an ABM motion, you don't just turn it on overnight. It's something that takes time and discussion and strategic planning.
You need a super tight team too. I think you like, even though you want cross-functional alignment, like you also want to have your core stakeholders that are your champion in that. So you don't have a ton of delays and like, it's kind of the subjectiveness around creative, right? Everybody has an opinion. So you want to make sure like the strategy is there, but if there's lack of sales and marketing alignment, a lack of a dedicated resource to drive the strategy forward and the initiative forward, or not clarity on how to measure it, I feel like those are often the three pillars that we've talked through most of this conversation that really can not set you up for success.
And I would just add, I think I touched on this in the very beginning, but if you don't have just core foundational aspects of your business lined up, ABM won't solve those problems. It's not going to fix product gaps or misalignment with your audience or unclear messaging or a clear deficit from a competitive standpoint. So I think sometimes people throw ABM at their go-to-market motion as hoping this will fix what is really addressed more of a root cause business fundamentals.
Yeah, and I would go back to, I think, just some of the things that we've talked about throughout. But if you try to launch this and then figure out what to measure after, like it's gonna fail because you don't have alignment on what the metrics mean, what do we care about, what are the kind of guardrails. I would say another one that I see often, and it's not necessarily a fail, but I think it just has to be understood how it's different, is when you're only running intent-based ABM, like that's a tactic. Like, in my opinion, it's not a full ABM strategy, right? It's strictly reactive. You're saying these people are already in market, we think, right? That's at least how you're valuing those intent signals, regardless of, I guess, if they actually mean that. But I think a real ABM strategy is proactive and not just strictly reactive. Right. And then you're measuring against, like, okay, are we getting engagement with these accounts? And then what does that turn into in when against a baseline of people that you're not running that playbook against. And then the last one is, I think we've all harped on this a bit, but is like tools first, or letting the tools drive the strategy. I have a good tagline from a former boss. I can't take credit for this one, but it's software doesn't create a process. It just pours cement around one. I think you could swap out process for strategy there, but like if you go with the tool first, now that's what you're doing, right? You buy the tool first, it costs a lot, it's maybe a 30, 40, $50,000 a year tool. Like you're going to be forced to use that, even if you find out later it was not the right one. So strategy first.
Perfect close. Appreciate everyone. If there's any last minute questions, feel free to drop them in, but this is always a good conversation. I feel like it's just a reminder that all of us have to kind of reformat how we think about ABM and just make sure that we understand it across the organization. So we'll be doing another event next month. Unsure on the topic right now. We're about ready to release 6 to 7 new playbooks, so it'll probably be around one of those. But thanks all again. I appreciate it. Judy, Scott, and Ciara for joining.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.